This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode with Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken starts the show as they chat about Joe recently burning a brush pile and its impact on surrounding wildlife. Keeping the show going is K-State's Erin Martinez, aging expert, as she discusses what farmers and ranchers should get medically evaluated and what things could be impacting their work. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk in today's show, looking at key factors for dairy producers in 2026. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode. As always, we're joined with K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken. On today's episode, they discuss prescribed burning and wildlife as Joe recently burned a brush pile.
You know, as I was burning this big brush pile, I kept seeing critters, lots of mice, lots of rats were running out, some rabbits. So lots of different critters were running out of there. And it just got me thinking, you know, is the outcome the same for those animals that have to leave their home that they had? Because when we translocate animals, you know, that survival rate isn't always very high.
Sure.
So what do those critters do when they run out of there? Are they all going to die, or do they have some hope?
They have some hope. And the big difference is, you know, when we're talking about translocating wildlife, capturing them and taking them far enough away that hopefully they can't get back to where we caught them at, that's different from relocating, which would be just moving an animal within its existing home range. And so when you're seeing critters run out of a brush pile that you're burning, or even if we're burning grassland and we see cottontails or cotton rats or some kind of mouse, or maybe even something bigger like a bobcat or a deer, they're running out of that area that's on fire, but they are most likely staying within their home range. And so they still know where all the resources are. They're probably taking advantage of that brush pile that you were burning as a source of cover, but they also know where the other cover is. They might have one spot that they use sort of as a den or as a home, but they're going to have other spots like that are sort of satellite dens or burrows and that sort of thing. Very few of them would have just one, unless we're thinking about a colonial species, you know, like prairie voles, and they might have one main burrow that a whole bunch of different prairie voles go to, but it's below ground. And so if we do burn all the vegetation off the top, they're typically going to be okay down in that below ground burrow.
You know, one of the other things that I saw, and you know, I see birds of prey all the time, but there were the number of birds of prey, hawks that have showed up, even an owl was hanging out during the day, but they were clearly, at least from my perspective, attracted to this brush pile fire. And that makes sense because, you know, there's a smorgasbord of food running around for them, right? But I don't know if that's true, if that's just perception. I was wondering if you know of any research that's tracked a linkage there.
Yeah, and I already knew about one paper. Torrey Hovick, he's faculty at North Dakota State now. When I was in grad school, he was studying kind of the same thing I was, patch burn grazing at Oklahoma State with Sam Fullendorf. And one of the things that he did was exactly what you're talking about. He did point counts of raptors or birds of prey during prescribed fire events to kind of document what birds might be attracted to these big prescribed fires and what birds might leave and that sort of thing, and look at differences among season to see if it's just an event that happens during migration or if it's an event that happens during different times of the year. Because if you've been around big prescribed fires in prairie landscapes, you know, we've kind of shifted the natural timing of those. You know, they would have probably been most common when it was droughty and hot and windy when we got low humidity and that sort of thing. And we do a lot of our prescribed burning, at least in the Flint Hills, during the spring. And so during that spring migration, or during that springtime fire, it coincides with migration of some of these raptors, and Swainson's hawks are the big one that we see during the springtime. And you can see these huge congregations. I mean, sometimes hundreds of Swainson's hawks that are riding the thermals that are created by that fire event.
Yeah.
But they also come down and they'll swoop around low, follow the terrain, follow the fire, and you can watch them catching the rodents that are running out of that fire. And then as soon as that landscape is black, sometimes you'll see these hawks that are just standing out there in this black landscape. And if you watch them long enough, they're looking around and they'll hop across the ground and they'll go catch a mouse. So that's an example of a bird that, because of the timing of their migration and because of their diet, that's focused on these critters that we flush out with fire, and because of the time that we do most of the burning that we do, there's this huge attraction to these fires. So that's what we see the most during the springtime, is that there can be these huge congregations of Swainson's hawks around the fires. But they also, in this study at Oklahoma State, looked at other seasons, and during the fall, they didn't see that dominance by Swainson's hawks, and that makes sense because those fires didn't occur during this big pulse of migration by those Swainson's hawks. So it was driven mostly by redtails. But the other raptors that were around at that time of the year were also attracted, just to a lesser extent. So they saw red-shouldered hawks and some of those other species too. But that smoke that they're seeing from the fire, the thermals that are created from the fire, that would still be there when we've got a brush pile burning in that same area. And so it makes sense that those birds were attracted to your brush pile fires by those same things. One of the things that just popped into my head when we're talking about seeing smoke, they don't smell the smoke the same way that folks talk about, and who knows if this is true or not, but one of the ideas that I've heard discussed is that bison might have been attracted to some of the really large prairie fires that occurred historically on the landscape by smelling smoke. But, hawks, owls, they wouldn't be smelling smoke and be attracted to a fire. They would actually see the smoke, but they absolutely have learned and maybe have programmed sort of into their DNA through adaptations across potentially millennia, that when there's a fire, there's going to be a pulse of food associated with it. And so it's a good thing to go check out.
When we have a really intense fire, these cedars were packed together, really, really hot fire in a small area. And I've done this in the past, so I kind of have an idea of what it's going to look like. But tell me about kind of what plants I can expect there, and what management maybe we might need to do in an area. And that's made me think about the management technique. What's the best way to do it moving forward? But if you have a high intensity burn like this, what's that do?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people talk about even sterilization of that soil from that really intense fire sitting on top of it. And when we, especially if we have a really big brush pile that's really dense and we burn it, and then maybe we bring a whole bunch more brush in there and burn in the same spot over time for years and years and years, we can see these places that might be bare for multiple years almost. But typically when we have a brush pile sit somewhere and we burn it, within that growing season, you're going to start to see those pioneer species come in, and pioneer species of plants. And those are going to be annual, really weedy type species, generally that come. They sprout from seed every year. And one of the cool things that we see after burning a brush pile like that is it almost creates this little micro food plot. And if we're thinking about white-tailed deer, if we're thinking about quail, wild turkeys, all those species really can benefit from those spots on the landscape as that successional process starts to occur. So what those end up providing for critters out there a lot of them are food plants for a species like white-tailed deer, and they end up being really important cover plants for a critter like quail or a critter like turkey because we've got that bare structure that's underneath this canopy of broadleaf plants that have come in there. And so that gives them cover. It also provides different kinds of cover. And it can be that brood rearing cover that we've talked about a little bit before, that, those recently hatched chicks, they go to a spot like that and they can really move around really well underneath all those, that weedy canopy. The adults benefit from the greens that are growing on that vegetation, while the chicks, or that brood that we have there, they really benefit from all the insects that those plants are kind of a nursery for. So caterpillars, grasshoppers, other arthropods that aren't insects like spiders, and all those sorts of things, that provides that really important habitat for some of these birds that's missing on a lot of the landscape. And same as it would be for the deer, a lot of those plants would also be food plants for cottontail rabbits and that sort of thing too.
Once again, that was K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken on part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode. If you'd like to hear the full episode, you can follow the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or search for Fins, Fur, and Feathers on your favorite podcast platform. As always, you can find more information from K-State's Wildlife Extension Team by going to wildlife.k-state.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing farmers' health with a person who is currently the Associate Director for K-State Extension Programs and was previously the state expert in aging, Erin Martinez. Erin, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Erin, as we look at our Kansas farmers, the current and average age for them is the late 50s, and so wanting to talk through a few things that could be impacting their health, or maybe they should go get checked out. And starting off with colonoscopies, is that something that maybe farmers should be going and getting checked out?
Absolutely. So we know that the risk for colorectal cancer is higher the older that we get. So this is definitely an area where we should be taking those preventative measures. So the American Cancer Society actually recommends that people with an average risk start getting their regular screenings at age 45. So for our average Kansas producer, that time has already passed. If you haven't gotten that screening yet, now is the time. But the good news is that they don't make this a lifelong sentence for you. They actually say that once you're over the age of 75, those screenings don't have to occur every single year because your colorectal cancer risk goes down just a little bit the older that we get. So point being, go get those colorectal cancer screenings, get that colonoscopy, do all of those fun things, and make sure that we are staying in as good of health as possible.
And one thing with people usually involved in agriculture, those farmers and ranchers also spending a lot of time outside. And so is there maybe a little extra concern about skin cancer for them?
Absolutely. So we know that the risk of skin cancer among the producer population is significantly higher simply because of the amount of time that producers are spending out in that direct sun. And oftentimes we may not be as protected as we should be from those harmful UV rays. So first, let's start with prevention. So that includes wearing proper sunscreen, long sleeve shirts that are very lightweight and breathable. There's also things like wearing a wide brimmed hat and some of those other common things that we think of when it comes to protecting our skin. Another element of protection is actually sunglasses. So sunglasses aren't just a fashion statement. They can also really be helpful for protecting your eyes from harmful UV rays as well. So you can actually get little cancerous spots in your eyes that are a direct result of really not wearing sunglasses over your lifetime. But if there's any time that you see something growing, something changing shape, like a mole that looks different or weird or, didn't always look like that, it's definitely time to get it checked out. So visiting the dermatologist regularly or just your primary care physician and just taking a look is so important.
And another thing common in agriculture, along with being in the sun, being around loud equipment and not always maybe protecting our hearing. And are there extra concerns and maybe some tie-ins when it comes to hearing loss or what people could be doing?
Absolutely. So hearing protection is so important because it really does protect our whole system when it comes to hearing and thinking and all of the things. And so what's really important to know about this is that when we have untreated hearing loss, our risk of dementia goes up considerably. So recent research has really found a strong tie between untreated hearing loss and that risk of dementia. So it's so important that we are both protecting our ears and our hearing, but that we're also utilizing the technology that's on the market for us when we do experience hearing loss. So also, another note is that earbuds or wearing headphones aren't necessarily enough. We really need that legitimate hearing protection that's braided and made for hearing protection. With hearing aids are a wonderful tool and technology that we can use, and they have advanced so much, even in the last 5 years. Now they make hearing aids so small that you can't even see them in your ear. They are really good now at picking up voices and conversation, whereas previously we saw hearing aids as these big chunky things in your ears that everybody could see, and really they were just good at amplifying all of the noise, which meant that your tractor actually sounded louder than what it was. But now that technology has improved so much that we can drown some of that out and pick up the things that we really do want to hear.
Have you also seen overall the cost of hearing aids go down a little bit from your perspective?
Yeah, so as technology has enhanced, we've also seen the cost of those things go down because the technology is more readily available. So we see that hearing aids are more affordable, but we also see that more health plans are covering the more technologically advanced hearing aids as well. So they haven't been as cost prohibitive in recent years as they historically have been.
And Erin, as you were the state expert in aging, how often did you see in persons aches and pains maybe actually be something like arthritis or something treatable?
Yeah, so one thing to note is that aches and pains as we get older are not normal. That's not a normal part of aging. Sure, it's more common, but it's not typical, and there are things that we can do to help prevent that. So as we get older, we might be experiencing more aches and pains just because our bodies aren't working as well as they used to. But there's oftentimes little things that we can do to help improve that. So if we think about arthritis, most of the time, the best treatment is physical therapy. I've heard the phrase and have used it for years that motion is lotion for our joints. So we've got to keep moving them and keeping them active in order for them to stay as healthy as possible. So there's all sorts of exercises and little movements that we can do throughout the day to help make those aches and pains go away, help improve them, and improve our overall mobility and our stability when it comes to getting older and thinking about fall prevention as well.
You mentioned fall prevention, and if people are going to their primary care physicians, is it maybe important to get a fall risk assessment?
Absolutely. So several fall risk assessments exist, and your doctor might have one that they prefer. You can also find some online from some reputable sources like the National Council on Aging or even AARP, or contact your local extension office and connect with them. But understanding your fall risk is really important because as we get older, falls are the leading cause of preventable injury among older adults. And that risk is even higher among our agricultural population because of the activities that folks like you are engaging in. We can see that the risk increases when we're climbing up into a combine versus someone else who's just getting in and out of a car. We can see the difference in risk there. We can also see the difference in risk if we're thinking about walking in the barn and we just harvested soybeans, and those things are like little tiny slippery marbles that really increase fall risk. So understanding our fall risk and how to prevent that and make sure that our bodies are as healthy as possible is so important as we get older.
Erin, are there other things that you would encourage older producers, any age producers, take the time to maybe go to their primary care physician and get things checked out?
Absolutely. So my minimum requirement for everyone that I know and love is that we go and see our primary care provider once a year. If you need follow-up appointments, that's fantastic. Make sure that you follow through with those and engage with your provider as often as they recommend. But for most of us who are healthy and doing just fine, once a year we'll cover it. And getting that blood work once a year and seeing where all of our cholesterol levels are and, our A1C and all of the stuff related to diabetes, it's so important. And if we see those numbers starting to creep up, there's things that we can do to help prevent that before our body goes into full crisis mode.
If anyone is listening and wanting to find out more information or maybe find resources important to them, what's your recommendation?
My first recommendation, if you're wanting more information on healthy living, healthy aging, is to get in touch with your local extension office. If they don't have the person in their office to answer those questions for you, they'll know who to connect you with. So we see more opportunities to engage in healthcare across the country through community health workers, through healthcare navigators, through folks who are trained to help us sign up for benefits programs and things like that. So there's good resources to connect with through your local extension office. Aside from that, visit your local healthcare provider once a year at least. Make sure that you are always utilizing reputable information. If something's not feeling quite right and you get on your favorite internet search engine, make sure that we're looking at reputable sources before we all start to panic and think, oh my gosh, the end is near. Let's connect with those reputable folks and get the best information possible.
Erin, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Shelby.
That is Erin Martinez, who is currently the Associate Director for K-State Extension Programs and was previously the state expert in aging. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. The key factors for dairy producers in 2026 include navigating high global production and tight margins, along with increased exports. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that industry promotion is another key factor.
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning what we see happening in the milk market and milk supply chain as we go through 2026. As a review what we've seen happen in 2025, there have been some bright spots. I know everyone is concerned about the amount of production increase we started to see about mid-year 2025 and how that accelerated as we went through the rest of 2025. And it has had some impacts on our prices and particularly on milk fat, as we've seen a sharp decline in the value of butterfat since mid-2025. And how will that spill over into 2026, and what does that actually mean for our on-farm milk prices? As you try to boil all that down, what do things actually look like? Well, if we look at 2025, it was actually a banner year for exports, as we've seen great increase over 2024. In fact, butter and milk fat shipments were up about 165%. We also saw whole milk powder increase as well, increasing about 56% over the 2024 shipments. And we also saw strong cheese and butter product demand as we looked at what was going out globally. The negative pressure that we actually see on our prices in 2026 is partially due to the increase in production we've seen here in the U.S., but also increases in production in New Zealand as well as the European Union. So as we look to the U.S. and what impact all of this may have on our prices on dairy farms here, there are some bright spots that we might pull from that may help us with this. Exports are going to be a huge part of our price as we move through 2026, so making sure that those maintain a strong demand and the fact that we need to export a lot of the extra product that we're producing is important. However, there are also some bright spots that we see coming on through promotion. Dairy Management Inc. has really worked hard the last 10 years to change the conversation around dairy products. And as we look at some of the things that have happened recently with the whole milk approval for schools, those things are having some impact on our ability to market dairy products here in the United States. And they have some new programs that they're looking to initiate here as we move into 2026 that may help us as well. Dairy Management Inc. and other promotion groups have been very influential in changing the conversation around dairy products. So we've come from a position where we were viewed as very negative on health to actually very positive. And that has been due to the human health research that has been sponsored, at least in part, by some of our promotion groups. Now, moving forward, what does that look like? Well, they'll continue with some of that research, and that's going to be important, but they're also looking at some new things that may help with our demand here in the United States. You know, a lot of times with dairy products, we kind of have tunnel vision. We think maybe that milk is just for kids or cheese is something that we might utilize at dinner. Now, as we think about how this impacts demand, it kind of puts demand into certain categories and really creates some tunnel vision. Dairy Herd Management has reported that DMI will be working on trying to break those things down, and they have some new campaigns. One of those is So Many Reasons for Dairy, just short videos that will hopefully influence the market and have people think about utilizing dairy in different ways maybe than they have in the past. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, looking forward to the changes that we will see in consumer views on dairy products, as well as ways that we can increase our local demand for dairy to offset some of the increases we've seen in on-farm milk production.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.